Hello, and welcome to Around the Political World with John Rothman. I am your host, John Rothman. If you're a fan of the show, make sure to hit the follow button on the top right of Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you are listening at this very moment. When you hit follow, leave a review or share an episode with a friend. It helps other people discover the show, keeps us going. As I like to point out each and every day, it expands our base. I want to speak this morning about revenge and retribution. Prior to the election, I had a fascinating conversation with a close friend who assured me that if Donald Trump won, there would be no retribution. There would be no effort that we now see so clearly happening of revenge. And I want to deal with this morning in a clear and precise fashion. Yesterday, Donald Trump signed an executive order attempting to strip PBS and NPR of their ability to function. Of course, he will fail in that effort, and of course, it will go to court, and I think that Donald Trump will lose. But the point is, he is scaring those of us who believe in freedom of speech and in a free, uninhibited broadcast media. This applies to the left, it applies to the right. Donald Trump's effort to destroy PBS and NPR is one of the most shocking developments of this administration. It is not that there cannot be discussion about the content of what NPR and PBS produce, but rather the ad hominem attack by Donald Trump on two very important news outlets. And that's not all, of course. He's gone after the Associated Press. All of you know that he banned the Associated Press from the White House press room and has done everything he can to limit the access of AP to what he is doing. This is something we need to understand. No president of the United States should be able to wage an unrelenting war against the media. I want to make this absolutely clear. What Donald Trump is doing violates every principle of the First Amendment, and he should be stopped cold. Now, there's another aspect of what Donald Trump is doing which is unbelievable. This morning, I understood and read and heard the news that Donald Trump wants to strip Harvard University of its tax-exempt status. Excuse me? You want to strip one of America's greatest universities of its tax-exempt status because you don't agree with their politics or because of your perception that there is something wrong with their politics? I find it absolutely incredible that the American people would stand for a president of the United States trying to stop a major American university in its tracks. Now, he won't succeed. Again, there will be court cases. But do you understand that this president's unrelenting war against those with whom he disagrees is doing great damage to the fabric of American democracy? And for those of you who defend the idea that a president of the United States should be able to seek revenge against those with whom he disagrees, let me remind you that is not the function of the American presidency. Do I sound adamant? Do I sound upset? Do I sound even angry? And the answer is yes. But I believe with all my heart that we must refuse to buckle down to a president who wages wars. And that's not the only thing he's done. His continued references to Canada as the 51st state. And we saw in the Canadian elections this week the rebuff of the Canadian people, who, by the way, bear no antipathy to the United States of America, but are deeply concerned about a president who seems to be completely out of control. The same thing applies to his repeated statements about the Panama Canal. He's going to seize the Panama Canal. Well, let me assure you of one thing. I don't think that will ever happen. And if he tried to do it, if he did, what would our reaction be? It would be the same horror that we reflect when he says Greenland should become part of the United States of America. There is something seriously wrong in this presidency. On top of that, we now know that the National Security Advisor to the president, Mr. Waltz, has been moved, dropped because of the scandal that enveloped his mishandling, including a member of the news media in his trail of texts and information, which called Singlegate. It is astounding to me that this president would do this kind of thing. Of course, he had an alternative. He dropped Mr. Waltz from the position he had in intelligence and shifted him over to the United Nations. Let me explain that once upon a time, being ambassador to the United Nations was a highly coveted position, one of great honor. I think of Republican Henry Cabot Lodge Jr. I think of Democrat Adlai E. Stevenson. I think of great civil rights leader Andrew Young. I think of Jeane Kirkpatrick, one of the most articulate people to ever sit at the United Nations, who was a conservative. I point out that what you now have Donald Trump doing is downgrading the United Nations. And by the way, the question of whether or not he was removed from his post as director of National Security Council is very clear, and national intelligence. The reason Mr. Waltz was removed because he made a mistake. You don't promote someone who makes a mistake. And by the way, that is what the Trump administration is claiming. Oh, we didn't fire him. We promoted him. Nonsense. Of course, it's a demotion. These incidents continue to grow. And shall I mention as well Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and his war against American health? Now he's going after vaccines, something we were told he would not do. Well, he is. He is. It's very clear. It's very precise. It's very unambiguous. He wants placebo testing using the vaccine method in order to determine whether vaccines are legitimate. This is coming from the Secretary of Health and Human Services, and you can go down the list. Down the list. When you're dealing with what Donald Trump is doing within government that is so disruptive. Have you tried recently to pick up the phone and call your Social Security office? You can't do it. Too much disruption, too many people laid off. And what about those who are in the question of Social Security's offices? Have you tried to go into a Social Security office? Can't do it anymore. And they're laying people off right and left. This applies also when it comes to FEMA. We know that in an emergency, FEMA is critical to responding. And we know that Donald Trump is stripping FEMA of its ability to respond. It's astounding. And yet, from the Republicans, a deafening silence. It was not a surprise when the United States Senate, on a vote of 48-48, with Vice President Vance breaking the tie, decided that the tariff limitations of Donald Trump are completely legitimate. Now, let me assure you that I don't believe that to be true. I believe that imposition of tariffs is a responsibility of Congress. It cannot be done unilaterally by executive action. And yet, Donald Trump, issuing executive order after executive order, because he cannot do it any other way, is now trying to reframe the American government. I grew up in a world in which there was a balance of powers, in which the legislative, executive, and judicial branches of government each had co-equal authority. What we have seen, regrettably, is the abdication by the legislative branch of any responsibility, and what we have seen from the executive branch is a continued abuse of power, and what we are waiting for from the courts is some restraint on what is happening. This is a national tragedy. I have no other way of putting it. And I say this with some regret. When I wake up every morning and I listen to the news, what has happened here in real time, I become more and more distressed about the future of our country. Now, I know there are those of you listening to the sound of my voice who are Trump supporters and who believe that everything he is doing is perfect. May I ask you, have you no consideration for those of us who point out the fact that it is not perfect? Have you no consideration for the distortions now taking place in relation to the American government? I remarked to someone just yesterday that in my library are many books about many issues dealing with American politics and the presidency. No book in my library could ever have imagined what Donald J. Trump is doing to the fabric of the presidency and American democracy. I regret deeply that I must even raise these questions with you. There are so many issues of such critical importance to our nation and the world. I would rather be talking about those issues. But what is happening now is so vital, so important, so necessary to discuss and expose. So I received an email from another listener who asked me, well, John, what recourse is there? The only recourse in a presidential abuse of power is impeachment. And let me be clear, impeachment is not on the table because in order to impeach a president, you have to have the votes in the House and in the Senate. In neither case does that exist. All one can do is make a historic record to point out to people where we are in all of this. Donald Trump is waging many wars, and these wars are being won in large measure because there is no ability of the opposition to respond. Even an investigation, which the Senate, in its wisdom, with Republican support, and Vice President Vance's vote in breaking the tie, made it impossible to even investigate some of the issues we are raising. This is a podcast that I make with some regret. But someone asked me, well, John, are you depressed? The answer is no, absolutely not. I believe with all my heart and soul that we must continue to battle against the abominations which are coming from the Trump administration. And I do call them abominations. I believe they are an attack on the basic fabric of American democracy. Thank God we still have the ability to podcast. Thank God we still have the ability to listen and hear and think. But do you understand that when you have attacks against the media, when you have attacks against our educational institutions, when you have attacks against the basic health of America, when you have attacks against our ability to respond in cases of emergency, it is an attack on the very fabric of our nation. We must, in every way, respond as vigorously as we can. This podcast is one way for me to respond. For you to respond, well, we have to count on the next election, and we have to count on the fact that the courts will ultimately kick into gear. These are things so pressing, so important. So when I talk about the wars of Donald Trump, well, I'm talking about fact, not fiction. And these are issues which we need to consider. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Around the Political World with John Rothman. I am John Rothman. Make sure to follow along and let me know your thoughts on the show by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts and sharing an episode with a friend or colleague so we can continue to grow and expand, which is, of course, our goal. You can interact with me, as many of you do, on LinkedIn, Facebook, and, of course, by direct email. The important thing is that we're thinking and talking. Who knows what will happen when Monday rolls around? I would say I can hardly wait, but, I can hardly wait. And to Gogo Zoger, the wonderful producer of Around the Political World with John Rothman, thanks, Gogo. I appreciate all of your efforts, and so does everyone else. Well, that's it for now. I'll be back on Monday with another episode of Around the Political World with John Rothman. Have a great weekend. I can't wait to be with you again on Monday.